Think back to school, any grade, pick a class. Maybe it was physics, maybe history, maybe biology. It does not matter which one. You are sitting at a desk. The teacher is talking. You are writing things down in a notebook. You are preparing for the test. You memorize the facts. You memorize the formulas. You memorize the dates and the names and the definitions. You take the test. You get a grade. Maybe a good grade. Maybe you were proud of that grade. Maybe your parents put it on the refrigerator. And then something interesting happens. A few weeks later, a few months later, you forget almost everything. The formulas dissolve. The dates blur together. The definitions vanish like smoke. You passed the test. You got the grade. But somehow, nothing stayed. And here is the part nobody talks about. You did not just forget the information. You never really learned it in the first place. I want to tell you about an experiment that Richard Feynman conducted. Not in a laboratory, not with equipment. He conducted it in a classroom in Brazil in the 1950s. And what he discovered there should disturb you. It should disturb you because it reveals something broken at the foundation of how we teach human beings to think. Something so broken that most people go their entire lives without ever realizing the damage it has done to them. Let me be precise. Because precision is where the truth lives. Feynman was invited to spend a year teaching physics at a university in Brazil. These were not children. These were university students, engineering students, the best and brightest their country had to offer. They had passed all the exams. They had climbed all the ladders. They had done everything the education system asked of them. And Feynman noticed something wrong almost immediately. He would ask a simple question, not a trick question. A straightforward question about physics. Something like, what happens when light comes in at an angle through a medium like water? Silence. The students would stare at him, blank faces. Nothing. But then Feynman would rephrase the question. He would say, what is Brewster's angle? Suddenly, every hand in the room would shoot up. The students would recite the formula perfectly. They would give him the exact definition from the textbook, word for word, letter perfect. They knew Brewster's angle. They could write it down. They could recite it in their sleep, but they did not know what it meant. They could not connect the formula to the actual phenomenon. They could not look at light passing through water and understand what they were seeing. They had memorized the name of the thing without ever encountering the thing itself. Feynman tested this over and over. Every time, the same result. The students could recite that light is reflected from a medium with an index and give you the exact formula. But if Feynman pointed at the sun reflecting off Guanabara Bay outside their window and asked what was happening, they did not know. The connection between the symbol and the reality had never been made. The connection between the symbol and the reality had never been made. Let me say that again because it is the key to everything. The connection between the symbol and the reality had never been made. They had learned to manipulate symbols. They had not learned to think. Feynman gave this disease a name. He called it fragile knowledge. Knowledge that exists only in one form, only in one context, only when prompted by the exact right words in the exact right order. Ask the question the way the textbook asks it, and the student answers perfectly. Change 3 words, and the student is lost. Point to the actual phenomenon in the real world, and the student has no idea what you are talking about. This is not learning. This is something else. This is pattern matching. This is training a human being to respond to specific verbal cues with specific verbal outputs, like training a parrot to speak. The parrot can say the words. The parrot does not know what the words mean. And here is where it gets darker. The students did not know they had this problem. They thought they understood physics. They had passed all the tests. They had gotten all the grades. Every signal the education system sent them said, "You understand this. You have learned this. You are educated." But they were walking around with heads full of words that pointed to nothing, formulas that connected to no reality, definitions that floated free from any actual understanding. They were, in a very precise sense, parsing out a script they had never written, about a world they had never actually encountered. Let me show you how this happens, because it is not an accident. It is built into the structure of how schools operate. A child encounters something genuinely interesting, a leaf, a shadow, a puddle of water with rainbow colors floating on top. The child asks, "Why does that happen?" And here is where the damage begins. Instead of helping the child investigate the phenomenon, instead of guiding them toward the experience of discovery, the system hands them an answer, a definition, a term. The child learns to say, "thin film, interference," without ever really examining the rainbow in the puddle, without ever wondering about it, without ever building a mental model through their own observation and reasoning. The wonder is replaced with a label, and the child learns something catastrophic. The child learns that understanding means being able to recite the correct label. This happens thousands of times throughout a childhood. Every time, the same pattern. Curiosity arises. A label is provided. The curiosity is extinguished. The label is memorized. And the child moves on, trained to mistake vocabulary for understanding. By the time that child reaches university, the damage is complete. They have been trained for over a decade to acquire labels without building understanding, to collect vocabulary without constructing meaning, to pass tests without ever thinking. And the tests reward this. The tests are designed to check whether you have acquired the labels. They are not designed to check whether you understand anything. They cannot check that. Understanding is too complex, too individual, too connected, too genuine reasoning to be measured by filling in bubbles on a standardized form. So the system optimizes for what it can measure. And what it can measure is the recitation of fragile knowledge. Words without meaning, symbols without reference, definitions that point to nothing. Sit with this for a moment. Millions of human beings go through 12, 16, 20 years of education and emerge unable to think, not because they are stupid, not because they lack capacity, but because the very system designed to develop their minds has instead trained them to avoid using those minds altogether. They have learned to wait for authority to provide the answer. They have learned to memorize rather than investigate. They have learned that understanding means being to repeat what someone else said, in the words they used, in the order they used them. This is not education. This is the destruction of education. This is taking a natural human capacity, the capacity for wonder and investigation and reasoning, and systematically crushing it under an avalanche of premature labels and standardized assessments. Feynman's father understood this. When young Richard asked about something, his father would not give him the name. He would describe the phenomenon. He would ask questions. He would guide Richard to observe and wonder and reason. "See that bird," his father once said. "I could tell you its name in every language on earth, and you would know nothing about the bird. You would only know something about humans, about what we call things. Watch the bird. See what it does. That is how you learn about the bird. The name is not the thing. The formula is not the understanding. The definition is not the knowledge." But schools have inverted this completely. Schools treat the name as the prize. Schools treat the formula as the goal. Schools treat the definition as the evidence of learning. And so they produce students who can recite Brewster's angle, but cannot see the light. The next time you are certain you understand something, I want you to try an experiment. Try to explain it without using any of the technical vocabulary. Try to describe what is actually happening in plain language. Try to connect it to something you can observe or experience directly. If you can do that, you might actually understand it. If you cannot, if you find yourself falling back on definitions and formulas and terminology, then you might have fragile knowledge. You might have words without meaning. You might have spent years accumulating vocabulary that points to nothing. The disturbing part is not that schools fail to teach thinking. Many people suspect that already. The disturbing part is that schools actively destroy thinking. They take children who arrive full of wonder and curiosity, children who naturally ask why, children who instinctively investigate and reason about the world around them, and they train that capacity out of them, systematically, thoroughly, over many years. And then they hand those children a diploma and tell them they are educated. Feynman saw it in Brazil. But it is not limited to Brazil. It is everywhere. It is the default mode of education across the entire planet. And you, sitting there right now, reading this, you went through that system. The question is, how much of your own thinking did it take from you? And more importantly, Can you get it back? The Feynman method.